It was supposed to be just another quiet morning in Courtroom 4B. A well-dressed defendant sat nervously beside his lawyer, and the prosecutor stood ready with a thick file of evidence. The judge glanced through her notes, preparing to begin. But then, from the back row, a woman stood up, not loudly, but with certainty. "This entire case is based on a lie," she said. The room froze. No one moved. For a split second, even the judge was silent. "Excuse me?" the judge asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. The woman took a step forward. "You're about to sentence an innocent man." Murmurs broke out across the room. The judge slammed her gavel. "Security, remove her now." Two guards rushed toward the woman, but she didn't flinch. Her hands were steady and her voice never shook. "Before you throw me out, read the report that was buried. The one from Officer Daniels, the one he died protecting." The judge paused. The name hit her like a ghost from the past. She looked up slowly. "How do you know about that report?" the judge asked. The woman answered calmly, clearly. "He was my husband." And in that moment, the courtroom wasn't a courtroom anymore. It was a battlefield of buried truths. The guards stopped. The judge stared, and no one watching could look away. Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled to identify the woman who had just stopped a trial with one sentence. Her name was Marla Daniels, a former legal assistant, and the widow of Officer Jonathan Daniels, the lead investigator of the very case now on trial. But what no one knew until today was that Officer Daniels had quietly opened his own off-the-record inquiry just weeks before his sudden death. He had begun to suspect that the man arrested, the man on trial, wasn't guilty at all. The night before his fatal car crash, he left something behind. A sealed envelope, marked only with his badge number, and a handwritten note. "If anything happens to me, give this to Marla." For months, she tried to hand that envelope to someone, anyone, at the district attorney's office. But doors were closed, phones weren't answered. She was labeled emotional, grieving, unreliable. They wanted the story closed. And a closed story didn't include new evidence. Inside that envelope was a single-page document, her husband's unsigned final report. It detailed a timeline that didn't match the prosecutor's case. It mentioned a witness never called. And most damning of all, it hinted that someone inside the department had ordered Jonathan to stop digging just days before his death. Now that report sat inside Marla's handbag as security waited for the judge's next command. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want attention. She wanted only one thing: the truth to matter again. And if the court wouldn't listen today, she was ready to take it to the public. Because Officer Daniels had given his life chasing the truth, and she wasn't about to let that truth die with him. The judge sat in her chambers, the courtroom empty now, except for one file, the envelope Marla Daniels placed on her desk before being escorted out. Silence filled the room as the judge peeled it open. Inside, one page, yellowed slightly, dated 3 days before Officer Jonathan Daniels died. His handwriting was unmistakable. It didn't read like a finished report. It read like a warning. The report stated that the original timeline presented by the prosecution didn't line up with surveillance footage Daniels had privately obtained from a nearby gas station, footage that mysteriously disappeared from official evidence logs. Daniels wrote about a second man seen leaving the crime scene, a man never identified or questioned. But most chilling of all were his last words scribbled across the bottom: "Internal pressure mounting, told to stand down, something's off. If anything happens to me, look closer." The judge leaned back in her chair, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. She remembered Officer Daniels, honest to a fault, never political, never afraid to follow the facts. And now his voice was speaking through ink, through time, through his widow. By morning, the whispers had begun to spread, inside the courthouse, across legal offices, and through the local press. The public wanted answers. If Daniels had been silenced, then who was pulling the strings? The district attorney's office made no comment. The lead prosecutor suddenly took leave, citing personal health. And the trial, once considered an open and shut case, was now cracking wide open. The judge was faced with a choice: ignore what she'd read, or risk her career to reopen the case. But truth doesn't care about convenience. And for the first time in this courtroom, the truth had a voice louder than the law. The next morning, the courthouse parking lot looked like the scene of a political scandal. News vans were parked bumper to bumper, cameras already rolling. Social media had caught fire overnight. Hashtags like Sana Justice for Daniels and San Hidden Report were trending across the country. What started as a minor courtroom disruption had become a national story. Inside, Judge Holloway entered the courtroom with a face that said everything had changed. The courtroom was packed. The defendant, once expressionless, now sat upright, hope in his eyes. And in the second row, Marla Daniels, calm, still, waiting. The judge took her seat, shuffled her papers, then looked directly at the lead prosecutor's empty chair. "The court recognizes an absence that can no longer be ignored," she said. "Due to new and previously unseen evidence submitted by Mrs. Daniels, this court is ordering a temporary halt to proceedings until an independent review is completed." Gasps echoed across the gallery. She wasn't just pausing the trial, she was reopening the entire case. Marla's hands were clenched tightly in her lap, but her face remained composed. This wasn't about revenge, it was about honor. About restoring the voice of a man who was silenced for knowing too much. Then the judge did something unexpected. "Mrs. Daniels," she said aloud, "please approach the bench." The courtroom went still. Slowly, Marla stood, walked past the security officers who had once escorted her out, and stood directly in front of the judge. "I owe you an apology," the judge said. "You were removed for speaking out. But you were the only one in this room who told the truth. You may have just saved a man's life." Marla didn't cry, she simply nodded. It wasn't over. But something had shifted. The system had finally listened. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was silent again. But this time the silence felt different, heavier. The air carried the weight of justice finally catching up to its own shadow. The independent review team had completed their investigation. What they uncovered was undeniable. Tampered evidence logs, missing footage, a second suspect never pursued, and internal memos that confirmed Officer Jonathan Daniels was instructed to halt his inquiry days before his fatal crash. It wasn't just negligence. It was a cover-up, and today the court had reconvened to make it right. The judge's voice didn't waver as she read the decision. "Due to newly discovered evidence that severely compromises the integrity of this case, all charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed with prejudice. This court recognizes a miscarriage of justice that would have continued, had it not been for one voice, one truth, and one woman's refusal to be silent." All eyes turned to Marla Daniels. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she simply breathed. For the first time in 2 years, like the weight she carried for her husband had finally been lifted. As she stood to leave the courtroom, reporters surged forward. "How does it feel to finally be heard?" one shouted. Marla paused, turned slightly and said, "I wasn't fighting to be heard. I was fighting so my husband wouldn't be forgotten." That moment went viral. Millions shared it. Talk shows replayed it. And for once the headlines weren't about scandal, they were about courage. The judge who listened, the officer who stood for truth, and the woman who refused to let the truth be buried. It wasn't just the end of a case, it was the beginning of something deeper, a reminder that sometimes one voice is enough to make a broken system listen. If this story moved you, subscribe to The Unseen Side. More untold stories are waiting to be heard.